Good morning and welcome to the SitRep for today, the 19th day of April 2023. Thank you very much for joining me. As always, I appreciate it. Thanks for everyone who's been hitting the like button, the heart button, the subscribe button, or the follow button. Whether you're following this on Instagram or watching this on Instagram, watching on YouTube, maybe even watching on Rumble, if that's working yet. I'm still figuring that one out. Or listening to this on the audio version, wherever you download your favorite podcast. I think there's a few of them, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify. I'm on all those ones. Anyway, this is the SitRep, the situation report, where we go through news stories that I've found interesting in the past couple of days and pick it apart from the perspective of prepping and just interest. That's interesting. What's happening in the world? What's going on? This is kind of one dude's attempt at understanding what is actually happening in the world right now. And for some unknown reason, you seem to enjoy me trying to figure that out. No, we're all just trying to figure this out together. The goal of this, obviously, is so that we can better understand what might be happening in the future and hopefully prepare ourselves a bit better as a community, as a preparedness-minded community, and look after each other. If something does go wrong, horrifically wrong in the future, not saying that it will, but if times get worse in the future, that we'll be better prepared for those times. All right, I want to jump on to the first story today. This is actually coming from the Indian Express, not a train, but a newspaper. Well, do you call them newspapers anymore? A news source, a news agency. A lot of people don't print newspapers anymore. Maybe there is a paper version of it, but anyway, that is beside the point. This one was sent to me by my main source, who sent me a whole heap of stuff in the past 48 hours, which is muchly appreciated, as always. Shutting down nuclear plants in the US could cause thousands of deaths every year. So if you've ever listened to a SitRep before, you know that I will bang on about this quite a bit, that I'm not against green energy. I'm against the idea that if you believe green energy can replace quickly the amount of energy that we use right now, then you have rocks in your head. You live in a fucking fantasy world, as far as I'm concerned, which a lot of people seem to do. A lot of people don't actually rub up against reality. The people who push these green agendas are not people who are close to the ground. These are people who live in cities. These are people who don't even know where their food comes from a lot of the time. They don't understand the this whole thing. I get this thrown in my face all the time because I'm a white male, white privilege, right? The privilege part, I think, is probably important. Like, privilege is become synonymous with something that's bad. It's an insult now. Privileged isn't necessarily a bad word. You could be privileged in many, many different ways. But the issue I think people take with the word privilege is that a lot of people don't appreciate that privilege. They just walk throughout life without understanding it. And certainly, I think, yes, I do have that. I have certain privileges that are afforded to me. And I try to utilize those as best that I can in the way that I think is the best way, at least. However, I think it's stupid to think that everyone's not privileged in some way. Everybody has privilege. People who sit there and bang on about the green agenda and go like, yeah, we just need to switch to green and then we'll all be fine. Like, just that term in of itself smacks of privilege, that they do not understand how the rest of the world is actually operating. So, in summation, what I'm trying to say here is, if we try and go to green energy wholesale, which is what the West is forging ahead with right now, what we're going to have is a shortfall of energy going out to people. What's that going to equate to? Harder lives for people, worse living conditions, worse quality of life, and ultimately deaths. And that's what this particular study is looking at. If we went down and shut down all the nuclear plants in the US, it would equate just like directly to thousands of deaths per year, every single year. Nuclear energy is one of the biggest sources of low carbon power. But it's still bad, right? I will just touch on this too, that quite often yes, there are accidents that happen with nuclear power plants, and they are bad. There are accidents that happen with coal power plants. There are accidents that happen with wind turbines and hydro and solar. All these things have accidents involved with them. Anytime we're trying to harness the extreme power that is energy, electricity on our earth, things can go wrong. So, yeah, things go wrong with nuclear, and sometimes those things are quite bad. However, on the whole, if you actually look at it, the amount of catastrophic failures we've had within nuclear power plants, it is insignificant compared to the other energy sectors. If you want to hold them up side by side, it is low carbon. Okay, like you can't not admit that it's definitely low carbon. It falls within the realm of what you would think of as a green energy. So why it's not being touted as such is beyond me. Really, I don't quite understand this. There are pros and cons to everything we do. If you think solar is pain-free, that it has no cost on the world, then you need to do some more research. If you think wind turbines have no cost on the environment, then you need to do some more research. And same with hydro. Hydro um, has some pretty significant pros and some pretty significant cons as well. That's one that's often touted as like the answer to everything, but it's not. And all those three things that I just mentioned there, hydro, wind, and solar, have limitations that are very much geographically linked. Some places can't build hydro because there's not the water system. There's not the amount of available water within that area. The other thing, or sunlight, or wind, for example. Whereas nuclear can operate anywhere. So continuing on with the story here, this is especially true in the US, which gets close to 20% of its energy from nuclear sources. If nuclear power plants are shut down, the resulting energy shortage would lead to as many as 5,000 premature deaths, according to a new study. So, you know, that's a fair chunk of humans then that you're effectively switching off the power switch to. And this is what they're starting to argue with, and this is what Europe's doing. And we should all just look at Europe, just look at Germany as an example and go, okay, they did it. Did it work? Is it feasible to do that? Germany is forging ahead with its green ideals. And again, like I'm not against green. I just think we need to be more sensible about this. That we can't replace the current energy system that we have with green sources and expect people to continue living the life that they are living. It's going to be very, very different, very painful for some people, and very dead for a whole heap of other people, as we're seeing here. And it's not like this is not the wealthy elite that's going to get hurt by this. This is not even middle income, even though middle income will probably, you know, be disappearing to endangered species at the moment. This is going to be the people at the bottom. And I keep saying this, that these effects affect the people at the bottom. And that's what we've really got to wrap our heads around. The food crisis that the world is going, that is feeling at the moment, isn't actually felt by us. It's why people aren't out in the streets in Sydney or Melbourne or Auckland going like, oh, we need to figure out our food problem, and you can't put taxes on cow farts, and we've got to look after our farmers and blah, blah, blah. Nobody's doing that right now because there's still food. There's still plenty of food in our supermarkets. However, in Africa, people are dying wholesale. And I was talking about this with some colleagues, one who was potentially looking at going into Africa, and we're thinking the western part of Africa. And I said, oh, you know, mentioned Marburg, and there was just glazed looks at me. I'm like, Marburg, like it's a horrific disease. And they're like, oh, okay. And you could see that instantly they were kind of like, I don't want to know about this. I don't want to hear about this. If this is not a pandemic thing, like I can't deal with it right now. I've got pandemic saturation. I'm like, no, Marburg's a pretty serious thing. Like, you know, you need to think about that if you're going to Africa. Why are they having Marburg outbreaks? I mean, they have outbreaks of disease in Africa all the time. But one of the reasons that I think that we're going to see more outbreaks in the next probably 5 to 10 years is that people are not getting enough nutrition. If you're not getting enough food, if you have famine, what follows from famine is pestilence. If you're talking about the 4 horsemen here, and ultimately death, obviously. And you can mix war in there as well, because if there's not enough resources, people are going to fight over it. But definitely what happens is you see a shortfall in food, people who can't eat, and you see an increase in disease. And that's what we're probably going to see throughout Africa. Unfortunately, with diseases like this, they don't often stay where they're meant to. Like, oh, you just stay in Africa and everything will be fine. We don't have to care about it. We don't have to think about it, like my colleagues were basically expressing to me. Well, this is something you should think about because, as we know, diseases do not respect borders. As hard as we want, as hard as, and I'm just going to give you the example here of Australia, as hard as our totalitarian government got over the past 3 years and tried to enforce these hard borders where nobody can move, what did it do? What was the grand outcome of that? Sweet fuck all. You did not stop. You did not even slow the spread of that disease. Have we learned from that? No, we have not. In fact, they're already talking about what do we do in the next pandemic? How are we going to lock down harder? How are we going to separate people more? How are we going to enforce more jabs, more masks, more of all that sort of stuff? So that's this is a total ramble here, but what am I talking about? Nuclear energy. Yeah, this is one of these things that I'm looking at this. I'm going, this is the wrong way to be going. Australia too. I think we should be looking at nuclear at least to supplement our energy generation. If we're not doing that, I really think we're heading down a dark path. Pun intended. Little comment here on YouTube. Neither solar nor wind turbines have a positive energy output. So what we're talking about there is how much energy it takes to get that thing up and running, and then how much energy output it has. And Norman Lacey here is saying that on YouTube that it does not, neither of those two have a positive energy output, because you've also got to factor in that a wind turbine doesn't just pop up out of the ground. Okay, somebody has to dig up those resources. Somebody has to that those resources get taken into a factory and get forged into the matter that they are. They get shipped out to where they're going. They get put up. All this thing takes trucks and fuel and energy to get it to that point. They get put up there, and then it's free energy forever. No, it's not free energy forever, because they break down. They need maintenance quite regularly. And the engine needs replacement. The fins need replacing. Eventually, the entire thing needs replacing. So it's not just free friggin' energy. This whole utopian ideal that people have is just like I said, it's like they got fucking rocks in their head. It does my head in. You don't appreciate the cost of something, I think is really what I'm trying to get at here. There's a lot of people don't understand what things cost. They don't factor in the full cost. They just look at the simplest equation of it and go, yep, that's the answer. That's all I want to know, because it confirms my bias on this. That is that both require more energy to put into service than they will be able to generate in their usable lifespan. Hopefully I explained that somewhat correctly. Didn't Germany just shut down their last plant, their last 3 plants? That's from Shelley 208. Thanks for joining us. Yes. Yeah, I think I talked about this 2 or 3 SitReps ago, that they shut down or at least going through the process of shutting down their last 3 nuclear power plants at the moment, which I don't know what to say. It's not like they're sitting pretty with energy at the moment. They just went through a massive scare, and the only reason that the entire European continent, and in particular Germany, wasn't punished, and I mean punished as in people hurting, prices utterly skyrocketing, and people dying over winter, was that they had one of the mildest winters on record. If they think that can happen 2 times in a row, 3 times in a row, then good luck to you. That's all I can say. Yeah, just shut down that nuclear power plant. Cost to wildlife as well with some green energy, says SpyScale27 through Instagram. That's absolutely correct. A lot of people don't factor in what it actually takes. The land usage alone for something like a solar farm. And there are solar farms set up in and around the major city that I live near, Canberra. You can see them, you can drive past them. Essentially what that creates is a dead zone. And a dead zone around the entire area, because they have to put those plants, panels up over a very wide area. So that area then gets taken up by those. Nothing can grow underneath it. I mean, you can grow things in and around it, but what most people want to do is, for ease of maintenance, just keep that land pretty much flat. So they'll mow around it. It shades out the entire area. No animals are going to hang around there because there's nothing to eat. There's nothing to hide behind. So it's essentially a dead zone, a total dead zone. That's why I always say this. I believe solar works. I like solar energy. I like solar power. I like the technology we have and where it's heading on a small scale. It works for individuals. If you want to outfit your personal home with a battery system, with solar panels, with everything you need to have power that is not reliant on the system, I say, pun intended, all the power to you, my friend. However, when we upscale it, there becomes a pretty big issue here. With anything, again, it's like, oh, when we upscale energy and we burn coal, that's bad. So we don't want to do that. So we'll do this. It's like, well, okay, you just outlined what the cost of coal is. We know what that is. Can you actually realistically look what the cost of that is? What is the cost? What's the cost of the land? What's the cost of the wildlife? What happens to birds' migration patterns when you stick wind turbines up in their path? Nothing? Do they just learn to fly around it? They do not, unfortunately. Shelley Joy says, exactly, they didn't learn a thing. Yes, Spice Girl. The Audubon Society has put out reports years ago about the millions of birds, some in migration paths, that are killed by windmills. It's ignored. I love it. Like, we're on the same path today. We're on the same brain space today. Anyway, short story. I will say it again. I'll continue to say it. It's not like I'm a advocate, like we have to go nuclear, everything is nuclear. I mean, I guess I am an advocate for it technically by default, in that I think that is our only realistic option. If we want to move away from burning, coal from other fossil fuel sources, I don't see at the moment a lot of really solid, big scale, and I'm talking mass scale, energy production systems that are not nuclear. It's as simple as that, as far as I'm concerned. Can give it a crack. This is one of these things where I'm thinking unintended consequences. In 25 years, or maybe 50 years, we'll look back on this and go like, well, we've got these desert plains now that were lush forest, but we cut down the forest and we had all this arable land that we could use to grow cattle or grow food for us, but we don't have that anymore, and that land has died off because we decided that solar panels were a better idea. And we know now that they're not, but too late. Welcome to the Sahara in Australia. All right, next story that I want to talk about. Where'd you go? Sticking with the farming idea here, this one popped up and I thought was super interesting. Again, sent to me by my main source, so appreciate that a lot. This is coming out of ABC News, our government propaganda news. No. They tell us that they have very clear and even reporting on both sides of politics. Anyway, a satellite outage disables tractor GPS services for farming operations and some maritime safety. So for those who don't know, the idea that you've got little Bob Joe farmer on his tiny little Massey Ferguson. I think it's Ferguson. Ploughing up the fields, or pushing an ox or something like that along. That doesn't happen. We've moved into, many years ago, mass scale agriculture. So this kind of huge monoculture agricultural system that we have now requires efficiencies. By the way, let me just put pause on this for a second. If you don't know how hard it is to actually farm nowadays, I will recommend a show. I think it's on Amazon Prime. It's called Clarkson's Farm. And one of the dudes, Jeremy Clarkson, who was on Top Gear. So he's a motorhead. I never really watched Top Gear. I wasn't really into it. But He seems like a pretty funny dude. Anyway, he's like a rich old white guy. He's stopped doing Top Gear now, and he's bought a farm, and he's just going about it. He's like, yeah, I'm just going to do this. I'll go out and farm, and I want cattle, or I want sheep, or I'll grow this, or I'll do that. And you can see him getting hamstrung with all the bureaucracy, with all the bills he has to pay, with how hard farming is, and then the actual farming itself, like working with or against nature as it sees fit. And so it is really eye-opening, I think, for anyone who hasn't actually had any kind of experience in and around a farm before, to see how truly, truly difficult and the almost insurmountable odds that are stacked up against the people who produce our food nowadays, and how very, very little they make out of it. Like, it is such a hard life. And I just, seriously, my hat is off to anyone who wants to farm nowadays. But the system is set that realistically, farming almost has to be done on such a mass scale now to make money, that it's corporations who own the farms, which is really unfortunate. There's way too much bureaucracy, way too much red tape, as far as I'm concerned. And again, the government getting their greasy, greedy little fingers into everything, into every plot of land, and making sure that they know what's going on, and that they get their cut of every single profit at every single stage. Anyway, I recommend that job. I recommend that show. I don't necessarily recommend that farm, but as I said, if you want to become a farmer, like an actual farmer, not just like pretend farmer. No, I'm more of a pretend gardener. I can barely even garden. But if you want to become that, then 100% my hat is off to you. And I aspire to one day be in the position where I could get into such a job. As in, it's not that difficult to get into, but the restrictions that I'm talking about within Australia of buying land, or even renting land, like I've watched all the people around my area. It's a rural area, and I see people who are farming, and I see what they're having to deal with. I see guys going in and out of jobs, and I see the land being bought up by the rich Sydney-siders and Canberrans, who kind of set up hobby farms that don't actually produce anything. And the land is slowly being eaten up in that sense. Anyway, enough of this rant. The point of this is that we need efficiencies, we need nice, clean roads, and the best way to do that is through satellite technology. So we can GPS navigate and plot our lines out and know exactly where we're planting things, and know exactly how the tractor should be moving, so we're not accidentally driving over something we shouldn't, that everything is actually planted or sowed to the exact size that it can be watered and fertilized and irrigated and whatever else you're going to do, and then obviously then cultivated and then harvested. All this sort of stuff is plotted out to the centimeter via GPS, and has for a long time. Like I said, it's not really super realistic. Most farms nowadays wouldn't be just a farmer out there on his old tractor going, boy, yep, I got this. Anyway, there was a satellite outage in this certain part of Australia, which this is a certain type of satellite in Marsat I4F1, for those who are interested in what it is. That it connects with the tractors, and so the tractors are going to move on those exact lines, and don't have any, takes the guesswork out of it. Anyway, that went down. Satellite outage impacted all the modern farms, all this modern farming practice that we had, that really rely on this. They totally rely on this GPS technology for both planting, sowing. To a lesser degree, once that's done, they've kind of got it lined up. They've got the lines there. They've got things marked out that they can water the plants and fertilize if they're going to do that, and harvest the plants. Yeah, but this is obviously a huge impact. One of the issues here that I think we're looking at is the vulnerabilities within our food system again, that I always like to highlight vulnerabilities within our food system. The real issue, the big thing that I read in this story here, was the farmer who said, basically threw his hands up and he said, look, I've done this for 15 years plus. I he didn't say, I don't know how to do it anymore without this, but he essentially said that. He said everything but that. I don't think any farmer would fully admit to that, but he was like, yeah, I can't sow now because like this satellite's down. I don't know what to do. Like it sounds crazy, doesn't it? But I mean, this is belying to or showing us at least where our society has gone as a whole. We have atrophied our skills at survival wholesale. All of us have. There are very few people in Australia who wake up in the morning. I'd say there's almost none. Who wake up in the morning and think, how am I going to source and purify my water? How am I going to source enough calories today without expending an equal or larger amount of calories in order to get that? How am I going to source shelter today to protect myself from the elements? We don't think about that. You wake up in the morning, you turn a tap, and magic, clean drinking water, potable water at least, comes out of your tap. And lo and behold, you turn another one and hot water comes out. Oh, miracle of miracles. So, that's a modern convenience. That's an example of a modern convenience. And because we don't have to source or even think about water, we don't. And we atrophy. Is that the right? Am I using that correctly? Atrophy that skill of finding water, of purifying water ourselves. Until something goes wrong. Right, why would we learn maths? Everybody carries a calculator in their pocket in the form of a phone nowadays. Why would you bother learning maths? Well, what if the phone was dead? What if it didn't work? Can you do some basic maths? This is an example of this to the nth degree. Satellites are down. This person can't put crops in the ground. No crops in the ground mean no harvest, means no food. Doesn't affect us right now. Imagine if this happened on a larger scale, is really what I'm trying to get to here. Again, that little sort of, here's a thought experiment. We live in this world where we think everything's going to be fine and everything's going to work all the time. We live in a world, though, of increasing complexity. And what that means is within that increasing complexity, there is increased fragility within the entire system, as in one thing goes down and it actually spider webs out and affects a whole heap of other things. Like, there was a blip in the satellite and we had to reset it. So there was no satellite coverage in this area for these people for this time. Not a big deal, except farmers needed to get their crops in the ground in that week. So they didn't, which means there's nothing going to grow in there in that section, which means in 9 months' time, nothing can be harvested, which means nothing gets sold, which means increases in food prices of whatever it was, say it was wheat, increase of food price, increase of wheat price, which then snowballs out to everything that has wheat in it within our society, which then increases CPI and inflation data, which then increases the cost of living for individuals. So you can see how something as small as this, a butterfly batting its wings across the world creates hurricanes on the other side of the world. This is what that is all about. Definitely something. This sort of stuff is something you want to keep your eye on, especially when it's around the food system. I'm always like really triggered by this. Like, what's going on here? We cannot rely on our food system. Or I think if you do just solely rely on the food system we have, you are betting on a failing system right now. Chris Fleming says, plant perennials as they're not as much work. That's for sure. But there's a lot of really tasty things that are annuals. So you might want to plant both. Plant both. Well, there are a couple of things that grow pretty much forever. Can continue growing back. What else am I going to talk about? India pushing back against ESG. I think this was interesting, especially the languaging about this. So India's basically come out and said, look, we need to resist efforts from Western ratings company to push ESG norms on emerging markets. So we're talking about environmental, social governance, ESG. You can kind of like, I see this as slightly synonymous with wokeness, that kind of agenda, and green agenda, those sorts of things. That's what ESG, that's sort of like the technical term for it, I guess. And it's all great and well for us to sit here. Again, this is that privilege thing that I was talking about. For us in the Western world who have developed, we've gone through the development cycle. We're at the top now. We're at the top of the peak, and we're going, okay, look, now that we're here, I think everyone needs to pump the brakes on coal. All right, we can't just keep burning coal. So we're looking at you, India. We're looking at you, China. We're looking at all the other developing countries. You're going to be creating way too much carbon dioxide. So yeah, just stop that. All right. Well, there's a bit of pushback against it now, as rightly there should be. I mean, there has been for a while, but this is starting to get into bigger news sources, maybe not mainstream media, but mainish stream media. They're basically pushing back, going like, who are you to actually tell us what to do? It's all fine and dandy because you're done with your development process. We're halfway through it. We're just getting started on this. I think this is quite interesting, and interesting from a number of perspectives, but primarily from, this is another data point to me that the whole US power structure is in critical condition right now. That ship has many holes in it. It's up like this at the moment. The band is playing furiously, and they are taking on water daily. This is yet another thing where India comes out and says, "Nah, thanks. You can rate all you want. You can say, you can waggle your finger and say this is bad, blah blah blah. We're going to continue doing it." And the truth of the matter is that China and India, just alone, those two, want to continue doing it, going down the path that they're going, and they are, by all accounts, as in increasing the amount of coal power plants that they're going to be opening and running, as well as nuclear as well. That it doesn't matter if some company waggles their finger at them. It doesn't matter what all the citizens of Australia think. If for some reason we are all homogenized in our thinking and went like, oh yeah, I can't believe this Indian company is doing this, or India as a whole is opening coal power plants, that's very bad. Brow bashing, like this. India would be like, I don't care. We're the most populous country in the world, or will be in a minute, and we're taking over from them, China, who is the most populous country in the world. It's one of us two. We've got more humans than you. We don't care what you think anymore, Western world. So you go and think, oh, what, you're going to have a sanction? That's cool. We're starting our own money over here. These guys have been kicked out of the club, basically, or some of them haven't been kicked out of the club. China's been kicked sort of out of the club. Russia's definitely been kicked out of the club. Venezuela's been kicked out of the club. Brazil's kind of got a bit of pushback. Iran's been kicked out of the club. Now they're getting together and they go, let's start our own club. How does that sound? And this is just another nail in that coffin, I guess. These are the signs that you should be looking for if you are in any doubt that the Pax Americana is going down, that the US empire, or the Western empire, or the empire that we've held in different forms for many, many years now, is on its way out. If you have any doubt, this is the sort of stuff that you should be looking at, looking further into it. I did say something about the languaging though, and I just want to highlight this. The developing world are done with neo-colonialism. So that's how they're framing this, or climate colonialism. They don't want to be lectured anymore. And I actually, I can't, from a moral standpoint, disagree with them, really. I'm like, well, no, it's fair enough. Like I said, we've gone through our development. We're fine. We won't be fine, I think, in the future. But the truth is, we've gotten to the point where we don't have to worry about a lot of those things anymore, and we can, really worry about the higher end stuff and go, oh yeah, we can just switch to green. Potentially we can, as long as we can continue outsourcing pretty much everything to places like India and China, but then expect them to do the same. I don't think it's going to happen. And expect the prices to stay the same as well. Also not going to happen. Yeah, I think there's going to be a huge pushback. I think this is just a trickle in the dam at the moment, but that dam's going to burst very soon, and we're going to get flooded with this. the pushback against ESG is coming. Mark my words. All right, what else we got here? Australia and New Zealand armies expand their military cooperation with Plan Anzac, sharing intelligence and technology. This is interesting because a lot of people assume that Australia and New Zealand are very interconnected with our militaries, and we have been in the past. But over the years, we've been slowly kind of not digressing, but not really having that level of interconnectedness anymore. Well, they're turning that around. Plan Anzac. They're very heavily. I read this entire story, and they are very heavily leaning on the language of tradition and heritage. For those who aren't from Australia and New Zealand, when I say Anzac, you may have no idea what I'm talking about there. That stands for Australian New Zealand Armed Corps, and that was a corps that was formed in World War One when we sent our troops off. They were called the Anzacs. It was really the how would you describe it? The coming out, or the coming of age of Australia and New Zealand, where we stepped out slightly from the shadow of British Empire, and we said, yes, we're still, your bosses are still tell us what to do. However, look what we can put forward. Look who we can put forward. And the Anzacs went out and fought very bravely in World War One, particularly in a place called Gallipoli, which was quite a horrific battlefield. Anyway, once every year, which is coming up next week on Tuesday, we have Anzac Day to celebrate and honor our fallen and those who serve in our militaries. And Anzac Day, it's still a big tradition, big thing here in Australia. Anyway, they're obviously leaning on this pretty heavily to try and say, we need to be more connected. We need to move forward as a united front here. I don't necessarily see this as a bad thing. The interesting thing I see about this, though, is this is totally my interpretation of this, okay? New Zealand has a new prime minister. I don't really know the dude at all. I haven't seen what he does or his policies or how he talks, but the impression I get is that he's a little bit of a I wouldn't say wet blanket, maybe wet paper towel, which is very similar to how I would describe our PM at the moment. So the two PMs of Australia and New Zealand, I think I don't see them as strong individuals, of people who can stand up and drive a nation forward and inspire people to do things. So the NZPM's been on his second visit to Australia, making more of these ties, and what we're looking at is this interconnection between our little part of the world here, as I think is pretty natural when you think about the pressures that are coming into our area of the world right now, i.e. the looming China problem. This moving forward, I think we're going to see more of this sort of stuff. The move will bring more joint Anzac operations into the Pacific region, was one of the things. So that's what I'm talking about there, that they're very much gearing themselves towards the China threat. They're going, okay, we need to look. I know we quip about each other, we joke. There's a bit of rib poking here and there. It's kind of like a sibling kind of rivalry, I would say, between Australia and New Zealand. But we really have to look out for each other right now, because there's a bigger, badder enemy out there. We can't be toing and froing between ourselves. Here's the key point, though. New Zealand is the official information that's coming out about their defence force is hurting, apparently. Their retention is non-existent. People have left wholesale from their military. And I know from personal anecdotal evidence that Australia might not be much better. I think we might be hitting our recruitment goals, but the problem is that we've dropped our standards consistently over the past 10 years. And I know for a fact that many of the most experienced people, those who are combat veterans, people who have actually been to war and fought in combat, are no longer in the military. And I know that because I'm one of them. There's no way I've been there. And many of my friends are also those sorts of people. And I know the elite level of our military and what has actually happened there. There are huge parts of this military now that are untested, untried, and are basically noobs. No offense to anyone in the military at the moment. Like, you're all training hard, you're all working hard, and obviously there's a big threat looming, and so you're gearing yourself towards that. But you just haven't been out there and done it yet, and that's not your fault. It's just the way it is. That's, I think the fault there is at the structure and at the headshed. And at this belies to a wider problem within our society. Our leaders are not leaders. Our leaders look out for themselves first and foremost. Our leaders will throw people under the bus in order to save their own skin. So think 2008 financial crisis. Who went to jail for that? Can't name anyone? That's interesting. Do you think maybe some people should have gone to jail for that? Because there was some very irresponsible behavior that caused that. It wasn't just environmental forces that caused that. That was human beings who caused that. But those people didn't go to jail. Not only did they not go to jail, but did they get fined the money? No. Also, no, they didn't get fined the money. But they didn't get paid heaps of money. No, that's wrong as well. They did get their bonuses. They did get paid money, and a lot of them got fired from jobs for doing the wrong thing and went straight into equal or even higher ranking positions somewhere else. So that's kind of like society-wide things that are going on there. Who did pay for that? Taxpayers paid for that when we bailed out the banks. You and I, we paid for that. And we continue to pay for that. Same with the military. Many people, I think, are a little bit disgruntled with our military forces because when push came to shove and stuff started happening and fingers started getting pointed, who was it who took the fall? Who fell on their sword? Wasn't the headshed. They looked for someone down the ranks. They looked for the individual soldiers and they threw them well and squarely under the bus. And that's happening right now. Right now. So, what, why would you want to stick around in a system like that? Well, you wouldn't, or you shouldn't, at least. Not when you're getting treated like such. That's my opinion on it, at least. So yeah, New Zealand retention has a problem. Now they're kind of like looking at Australia, over to Australia, and like, hey, do you guys want to team up? It'd be really cool if we teamed up, because we don't have many people anymore. So just an idea. And Australia at the moment is like, yeah, let's do that. Those New Zealanders, they're hard. Having said that, like, there are still many good men and women who are serving in both of our forces in Australia and New Zealand, and I want to give a massive shout out to those people for doing that job. Because at the end of the day, it's a tough job, it's a shit job, and apart from Anzac Day, you're probably not going to get too many pats on the back from people. And the people who are in charge of you are not going to look after you, just so you know. Chris Fleming says, lest we forget, more appropriate now than ever. Indeed, lest we forget. Leaked Pentagon documents, some of the takeaways. So this came out from CBS News. One of the really interesting things about these leaked Pentagon documents is how much focus has been on the individual who leaked them, which, cast whatever judgment you want there. Probably not a good thing, as far as I'm concerned. But it's been squarely about that. Look at this person. Look, we caught them. Tim, this is the person. This is what they do. Look at the person. Look at the person. And people are like, cool, what did they release? And they're like, don't worry about what they released. Look at the person who released it. That's the important part. This is the person. We caught them. Here they are. This is what they did. Cool. What information was actually... No. Don't worry about the information. This is the person that we caught. Well, this actually goes into a little bit of the information of what was there, or it gives a bit of a summation of some of the stuff. And there's a whole heap of stuff. And it really goes through everything from Russia-Ukraine war, Russia's status, numbers that were lost there, a whole heap of other different countries, allied countries, and things like that. And I've touched on this in the past. Here's a really interesting piece that was highlighted to me by my main source, what they revealed about China. And I'll just give you a quick summation of this. They've got hypersonic missiles, that have glide capability and can move. They can move at about 5 times the speed of sound. They can travel at 5 times the speed of sound, and they can change course as well. They are potentially, they say in this document, that they are potentially able to get through any of the current missile defense systems that the US has. Being that most traditional ballistics move in an arc. So it's sort of like, okay, we see where it's fired, we see its trajectory, we know where it's going to land, we can intercept it. Whereas these ones are moving much faster, can be going lower, can be going a lot higher, and can move around as well. Makes it very, very hard for them to target them and stop them. Another couple of documents, China is probably developing cyber attack capabilities to hijack control of Western satellites. So again, just tag that that satellite disruption that we we're talking about before. And I said, what happens if this happens on a mass scale? Or what's the likelihood of that happening? Well, if China decided to target our satellites, it would be, pretty high probability that it would happen. So again, if you're somebody who's totally reliant on satellite technology, GPS technology, or whatever it is that you're using, whatever form of satellite technology that you're using, maybe think about some alternatives as well. There was also a thing about, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, Hike Vision or Hick Vision, which is basically Chinese state-owned surveillance manufacturer. They create surveillance equipment, and they're reselling that equipment. So there could be backdoors in it and whatever, but we know that's Hike Vision. But they're rebranding it, so it's going out to a lot of other brands through an intermediary and then being rebranded and sold. And so that's obviously a bit of a concern for the US here, because that was highlighted in there. And then just a couple other things they're talking about. China influence on other countries, particularly they highlighted here Jordan with 5G technology, and Nicaragua, where they're putting pressure to get a deep water port off its coast. So that's, moving into Central America there, getting close to the US. This one I found really interesting. So I was talking about nuclear being shut down a lot of the places. Well, this is a mixed signal here that's going on, and maybe we need to read between the lines, and maybe we need to read the subtext here. We need to delve a little bit deeper on this. But I'll just put this out. This from ABC News in the US. US ready to lend Poland $4 billion for nuclear energy plan. A project to develop about 20 small nuclear power reactors in Poland is moving forward as Polish energy company Orlen and 2 US government financial institutions signed an agreement. So some very interesting developments in nuclear power there and what's actually going on. On the surface, I'll look at this and go, okay, this is interesting. Now, why are they doing that in Poland? Why are they not doing that with Germany? Are they looking at what Germany is doing and they're saying, hey, we're seeing a shortfall here. You guys really need to think about this. Poland, you're more open to this idea. How about we put nuclear power into your country? Or is there something else that's going on here? Like, if we want to go real tinfoil hat for a second, are we looking at some sort of disguise for them to move nuclear material into the country? Are we looking at some sort of disguise for them to have a capability to refine nuclear material within what would you almost call the front line? Could be the new front line, but Poland's right up against Ukraine there, so doesn't get any closer than that, except for putting it into Ukraine. So that's my tinfoil hat for the day. Conspiracy theory. Just an interesting one in geopolitics that are going on there. Also, I'll just stick with this last one because it's got to do with food and it's got to do with Europe, so I'll stay in Europe. Slovakia joins Poland and Hungary in halting Ukraine grain imports. So I talked about this one in the past, these grain imports that are actually hurting the market, hurting farmers in Europe. Essentially, EU saying, oh, woe is Ukraine's situation. Poor Ukraine. We need to help them out as much as possible. So they're hardworking farmers who are pulling that grain while bombs are going off around them. Well, we'll take off the tariffs, we'll take off the taxes from their grain and allow them to sell it into Europe, which they did, obviously. They're like, money to be made. And all the local European farmers were like, what? Now their grain is cheaper than our grain. So of course people are going to buy their grain and people aren't going to buy our grain. Now our grain just rots because you got grain. Not to mention the fact that the Ukraine grain probably should be going down to Africa right now to feed them because they're starving down there. Anyway, Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary came out and said, no, we're not doing that. We're not taking Ukraine grain. We're not going to do it. We're going to look after our own farmers in our own country here. That's got the EU offside. They're like, hey, we're unanimous on this. And Poland and Hungary are like, clearly we're not unanimous on this because we don't want to do it and we're not going to fucking do it. So the EU shook a fist at them. And all that did, that fist shaking just knocked another country out of the tree, and Slovakia came on board with these guys as well and said, no, now we're not doing it either. Which is going to make, I think the reaction we're going to see is more like double fist shaking from the EU as they get angrier, but it's also going to embolden other countries because I think that's what's happened here. Hungary very much is always ready to go toe to toe with the EU. They're always up for it. They're up for that fight 100% of the time. If anyone's going to argue with the EU, I reckon it's probably Hungary. There's a couple other contenders in there as well, but probably Hungary. So then Poland's come on board with them, said, no, yeah, we like what's going on, what the words that Hungary's saying right now. And obviously, and I think Slovakia's looked at it and gone like, all right, if you guys are doing it, yeah, actually, we don't want to fuck around our own farmers in our own country. We want to support our own agricultural system and not another country's for the sake of supporting the war effort. So, that's actually one step too far. I think there'll be more pushback from the EU. I also think there'll be other countries that will consider joining this as well. Because at the end of the day, yeah, you're going to destroy your own agricultural system within your own borders in order to support the war effort. I think there's better ways you can support the war effort. And I think there's better places that Ukraine grain can be going. All right. Obviously, that's a bit of geopolitical sort of stuff, that doesn't affect us necessarily down here in Australia and New Zealand, apart from the fact that all these maneuverings within the food system have longer term effects and they have effects across the world in prices. So I think if you were hoping that food prices were going to come down in the next 3 to 6 months, I don't think they are, unless there's some other rabbit that gets pulled out of the hat, unless something drastically changes. I think food prices are going to at least be same or increase. And my bet personally is increase. We will see an increase in food price, and more to the point, we'll see an increase or a decrease in value of our money, which will increase, i.e. inflation, which will increase the price of food as far as we're concerned. That's the summation of it. At the end of the day, how does it affect us, the individuals, at the coalface, at the Coles face, or Woolworths face, or wherever you're buying your groceries from? All this sort of stuff adds into the big pot of fuckery, inflation, food price hikes. So yeah, I think it's going to go up. Any food that you've been buying and storing means that you are eating food that is cheaper than is on the shelves right now, which means if things get to a point where they spike or something, you might be able to go, okay, I can't afford that food right now, but I have this stored up and I'm eating this. Can of beans now costs $10. I bought it at $1.50 and I bought 2 slabs of it. So now I can eat that. So that is your savings that you're eating into. You're not having to go into your money savings and go, oh, bam, here's $20 for a can of beans. That's one of the ways of looking at prepping. as far as I'm concerned. Why I, say at the end of every show, like, hey, continue your food preps, continue storing up more food. And at the end of the day, you should be aiming at that kind of mark of being, can I survive 3 weeks? Can I survive 3 months in my house without ever going outside of it, without going to a supermarket? I think that's a pretty worthwhile target. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there today, gang. Thank you very much for joining me. As always, I very much appreciate it. Helping spread the word. I appreciate every single one of you who hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the heart button, whatever it is that you do. I appreciate that, and help spread the word on this kind of preparedness mindset. The more people we can get more prepared, the better off we're going to be in some sort of SHTF catastrophe that happens, but also the better off we're all going to be if things just continue declining and we go into a harder time. So that's what we're all about, spreading the good word. Have you heard the good news? Might start doing that door to door in a suit. Have you heard about the Lord and Savior prepping? I have to think of some sort of church name for that. Might get a tax break, actually, if we do that. Let's shelve that one for now. Thanks for joining me. I'll catch you guys next time. Really appreciate it. Get out in the gardens, keep gardening, keep growing food, or keep at least attempting to. Keep storing up the food, keep prepping, keep your skills up, keep happy, keep smiling. And until next time, Semper Paratus.